The other thing is a system of weapons or a group of weapons known as thermobaric. The thermobaric weaponry, which works on the principle of air fuel. It can take oxygen out of buildings. It can cause mass destruction, particularly of concentrations of civilian population. That's where you have prima facie, once you use that in a place like Kiev, Kharkiv, or wherever, that is a war crime. Come in, Mr. Philippe Sands. That this really must be acknowledged as such. And I think NATO has to be prepared for that. I think that we are seeing in this, very quickly to leave you with this, is quite how unprepared mentally, philosophically, culturally, NATO is for this.
Lots to go through. Just this afternoon, to recap, a lot has happened. President Putin put out quite a chilling set of words saying that he was preparing to raise the alert status for his nuclear weapons. We then heard about these talks that were going to take place on the Belarus border between Ukrainian officials and Russian officials. We've also heard in the last hour that the EU will be shipping arms to Ukraine. The EU is also closing airspace to Russian airplanes and has said it's going to ban pro-Kremlin broadcast, which I presume will include Russia Today. But we have also heard an ominous statement from the Ukrainian government saying that actually airstrikes have, or some missiles have been fired from Belarus. So there's lots to unpack there. And let's just remind ourselves about what the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said this morning, because let's be honest, nobody quite expected things to escalate as rapidly as it has this past week. Liz Truss this morning, speaking to the BBC's Sophie Rayworth, had a very stern warning of more violence ahead.
I fear that this will be a bloody and long-running conflict, but senior Russian officials should be aware that if they do go into that arena, they could well be tried for war crimes in the future. I mean, this would be extremely serious escalation of the situation.
Jackie Doyle-Price, I'll come to you first. I mean, as I say, there's a lot has happened just in the last couple of hours. Where do you think things are, and how nervous should we be about Belarus getting involved in the situation now?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to speculate because, I mean, we are in a truly horrendous situation. This is the worst situation we've faced in Europe for 50 years. And I don't really want to speculate. What I do want is and what's been reassuring is the collective political will to actually work together to address all of this and make sure we're in the right place. But, you know, I just don't think we can predict what Russia will do in this scenario, and we've got to be particularly vigilant. It's reassuring to hear that, you know, from the words of our ministers, that they are really on it. But yeah, this is a very precarious position, and our hearts go out to the people in Ukraine who must be extremely nervous and anxious right now.
Yes, I mean, we've been speaking with some of our correspondents who are still in Kyiv, a very worrying situation. Stuart MacDonald, I'll come to you next. I mean, what's your assessment, particularly about where things are on the ground from a military point of view?
Well, Russia clearly hasn't had the opening to this conflict that it thought it was going to have, or hoped it was going to have. Ukrainian armed forces have proven to be extremely resistant and resilient, along with people in Ukraine too. I'm a bit concerned at there are obviously still missiles coming into the country, the latest ones you just mentioned coming from Belarus. It is also the case that not all of the forces that were amassed on the border have actually crossed into Ukraine yet, but it's not a good situation at all. That would be an understatement. But I think all of us have been impressed and can only heap praise on the Ukrainian armed forces, who have just proven to be absolutely outstanding on the front line of a war for freedom and democracy. And that might sound hyperbolic, but that's what this is.
Yes, absolutely. And people, tributes paying into the spirit of the Ukrainian people, that the leadership being shown by President Zelensky and individual MPs, who are visibly prepared to fight themselves. Barbara Keeley, how confident do you feel that, do you think there is any way of a diplomatic solution through this? I mean, there are these, I wouldn't go as far as calling them peace talks. They're more negotiations that are taking place today. How do you think any progress could be made out of that?
Well, we'll all hope so. I'm sure everyone hopes so, but it seems unlikely. I mean, it's right that President Zelensky is prepared to try that. Is prepared to negotiate. But what I think is that we shouldn't be surprised that Putin starts to make the threat of nuclear weapons. I think I agree with Stuart. Putin's invasion isn't going to plan. And, particularly given the absolutely fierce resistance of the Ukrainian people and President Zelensky, and the fact that they are truly defending their democracy that they value, it isn't going to go to a plan of sweep in and install a puppet regime, which is what most people seem to think Putin wanted to do.
Yes.
But I don't think we can say, but clearly we will hope against hope. But it would seem very unlikely that a character like Putin, who uses terror and threats in the way that he does, would crumble so soon. But one can only hope so.
We just got a bit of breaking news for you. BP has just announced that it will offload its 19.7% stake in Russian state-owned oil firm Rosneft after Russia's act of aggression in Ukraine. Those of you who caught my chat with Oliver Shah, the associate editor of the Sunday Times, he writes in the business pages. We were having a big discussion about that yesterday, so that's very interesting. And we're going to come on to discuss sanctions and some of the economic ramifications next. Robert, if I could come to you, I mean, where do things go next? Because, of course, I had Sir Kim Darroch on the phone. I mean, he was very straightforward and said, look, I don't think we should be optimistic that much will be achieved from these talks, maybe more process. I spoke to the foreign policy advisor to the Ukrainian government in the last hour. She said, look, Zelensky goes into these talks in a position of strength and defiance. She said Ukraine is absolutely clear. We will not give up our sovereignty and we will not make concessions to the Russians. So where do you think this goes next?
I don't really know. I think you're quite right. We shouldn't be over-optimistic about these talks. They always happen. Go back to Vietnam. How many preliminary talks went on there? I think it must be dawning on Putin that he has more and more to lose. As one of the MOD in uniform analysts, looking at moving maps through satellites hour by hour, put it to me yesterday or the day before, the longer Putin's military plan to get into the center of power, however he conceives it, in Ukraine, and it's really get Kiev, decapitate the regime of Zelensky. That seems to be the aim. A delay by one day means that he faces the prospect of the campaign, for Putin this is, going on by at least a week or several weeks more. The time scale is slipping. I agree with all my fellow panelists on that. But I would like to take up a point that I think Stuart raised. Yes, I'm not surprised he hasn't fully committed all the force of, God knows how many they really were. Actually, I think nobody really knew. But it was well over the 100,000 that he had surrounding Ukraine from Belarus all the way round to the amphibious forces in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. Because he's now got a problem. We can see that already with reserves. Once he's committed his reserve forces, and by the way, we're not hearing too much about what the casus belli was, the reason for going to war, the Donbass, where the bulk of the Ukrainian army is, that once he commits his reserves, as far as I can see on the picture, there isn't much reserve more to call up. Even if he goes way out east to Vladivostok, even, I'm being serious here, the garrisons in Siberia. And that we've talked about this mighty army, but such is the way of modern warfare and modern ultra-mechanized warfare. You do not have too much to spare. And I'm sorry I'm going on a bit. There's another element which people are not talking about, and it's hand-to-hand fighting by dismounted infantry of Russian soldiers. Sorry, emphasis, ethnic Russian soldiers who will have cousins and kindred and will have seen themselves as being as part of the same folk as Ukrainians. And what they have done so far, this is an important news point that hasn't been brought up in our discussion, is that they've been using Chechen forces, Chechen militias, to do the dirty clearing up, and they blew out a column of Chechen so-called special forces coming into Kiev yesterday.
Okay.
That has been confirmed from all sides, and they killed the general. They destroyed a column. Now that's the kind of thing that Putin likes to use.
Okay.
He's on the back foot at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that, Robert. I'm going to come back and ask the panel. Look, there's definitely a view that the Ukrainian forces have absolutely overperformed and that the Russian forces have underperformed. But a lot of experts are saying, look, this might push Putin to sort of, I'm saying metaphorically, press the nuclear button. I'm hoping that's not true, but this could take quite a dramatic turn. And I want to come back and get the panelists' views on that just after.